In the industrial heart of Germany, throughout the 60s and 70s, a shadow moved undetected through the crowded cities of the Ruhr district. For over 2 decades, a man lived a life of such profound insignificance that he became invisible to the neighbors who saw him every day. Joachim Kroll was a quiet, unassuming toilet cleaner who lived in a small, sparse apartment in Duisburg. He was a man of simple routines and few words, yet behind his dull exterior lay a predatory drive that would eventually lead to one of the most disturbing investigations in criminal history. While the police searched for a sophisticated mastermind, the real threat was a man who operated with the efficiency of a scavenger. The discovery of his crimes would force a nation to look at the people they ignore every day. Let's go deep into the well. Joachim Kroll was born in 1933 in Upper Silesia, growing up in a world defined by the chaos of war and the struggle for survival. He was one of 8 children, raised in a family where resources were scarce and emotional warmth was even scarcer. From a young age, it was clear that Kroll was different from his peers. He struggled in school, showing a limited intellectual capacity and a total lack of social integration. He was a man of functional simplicity, someone who moved through life without making an impression on anyone. After the war, he moved to West Germany and found work as a laborer and eventually as a toilet cleaner at a large industrial plant. This professional role suited his personality perfectly. It was a job that required him to be present but kept him socially isolated. He lived in a small, rented room in Duisburg, where he maintained a lifestyle of extreme frugality. He had no friends, no romantic partners, and no hobbies that anyone could identify. To his neighbors, he was just a ghost in the hallway, a man who existed on the absolute periphery of society. This lack of presence was his greatest asset, allowing him to hunt in plain sight without ever raising a single suspicion. The predatory cycle of Joachim Kroll began in 1955, shortly after the death of his mother. Her passing seemed to trigger a functional break in his already fragile psyche. He committed his first murder in a forest near his home, a crime that set the pattern for the next 21 years. Kroll killed because of a deep, internal drive that he himself could barely articulate. He targeted the vulnerable, often choosing victims in parks, forests, or near the many canals that crisscrossed the Ruhr district. His methods were brutal and direct, reflecting his own lack of sophistication. He was a hunter who operated on instinct, moving silently through the industrial landscape to find his prey. Because he lacked a car and moved primarily on foot or by public transport, his crimes were spread across a wide geographic area. This functional dispersal made it nearly impossible for the various local police departments to link the murders together. They were looking for a high-profile serial killer, while Kroll was simply a man taking a walk in the woods, blending into the soot and the steel of the German industrial belt. Throughout the 1960s, the body count attributed to the unknown killer grew, but the investigation remained stagnant. Kroll was a professional at being nobody. He would go to work, perform his cleaning duties with robotic precision, and then head out into the evening to find a victim. He showed an incredible ability to return to his normal life immediately after committing an atrocity. There was no cooling-off period and no change in his behavior. He did not boast about his crimes, and he did not leave taunting notes for the police. He simply consumed what he wanted and returned to his small room. This level of emotional detachment was a functional shield. Even when he was questioned by police during routine sweeps of the areas where bodies were found, he was dismissed almost immediately. His low intelligence and humble profession made him seem incapable of the crimes being investigated. The police were looking for a monster with a complex signature, but they were standing in front of a man who was so ordinary that he was effectively transparent. Kroll continued his silent work, moving between the cities of Essen, Duisburg, and Wuppertal, leaving a trail of sorrow that remained disconnected in the eyes of the law. The functional nature of Kroll's crimes took a darker turn as he began to incorporate cannibalism into his routine. He viewed his victims not as human beings with lives and families, but as a source of sustenance and satisfaction. This was the ultimate expression of his isolation. He had no connection to the human race other than through the violence he inflicted. He would take parts of his victims back to his small apartment, where he would cook them on his single-burner stove. He lived in a building with shared walls and common hallways, yet the smells and sounds of his activities never triggered an alarm. This speaks to the profound urban isolation of the era, where people lived in close proximity but remained total strangers. Kroll was a scavenger in a modern city, using the anonymity of the apartment block to hide the physical evidence of his kills. He was a man who had engineered a way to live entirely outside the moral and social boundaries of humanity while remaining physically in the center of it. His small room was a private world of horror, hidden behind a thin door that none of his neighbors ever felt the need to knock on. The end of Kroll's long and bloody career came in 1976, and it was caused by a simple, functional mistake. In the apartment building where he lived, the plumbing had become severely blocked. A neighbor, frustrated by the rising water and the strange debris coming from the pipes, called a plumber to investigate the issue. When the plumber opened the manhole in the basement, he found a scene that defied explanation. The pipes were clogged with what appeared to be human remains. The police were called immediately, and they began a systematic search of every apartment in the building, tracing the source of the blockage. When they reached Kroll's door, he was sitting calmly in his kitchen. On the stove, the police found a pot containing the final evidence of his most recent crime. The invisible man had finally been caught, not through a brilliant piece of detective work, but because of the physical reality of his own waste. The bathroom in Duisburg had become the final witness to a tragedy that had lasted over 2 decades. The interrogation of Joachim Kroll was a professional challenge for the German detectives. They were dealing with a man whose vocabulary was limited and whose understanding of the world was profoundly basic. He spoke about his victims as if he were describing a trip to the grocery store or a day at work. He provided details for 8 murders that the police already had on their books, but as the sessions continued, the number began to rise. Kroll started to describe crimes that had been forgotten or classified as accidents. He walked the detectives through his functional process, showing them the locations in the woods and along the canals where he had hunted. He was a man with a perfect memory for the logistics of death, even if he could not remember the names of the people he had killed. The detectives realized that they were dealing with one of the most prolific killers in history, a man who had operated with total success because he was simply too dull to be a suspect. The hunter of the Ruhr was finally speaking, and the truth was more horrific than anyone had imagined. The revelation of Kroll's crimes caused a massive wave of public anger and institutional shock across Germany. People were horrified to learn that a man of such limited capacity had outsmarted the combined forces of multiple police departments for 21 years. The investigation revealed that Kroll had been responsible for at least 14 murders, though some believe the real number could be even higher. The professional fallout was significant. It led to a total restructuring of how serial crimes were tracked and communicated between different jurisdictions. Kroll's case became a benchmark for studying the mundane killer, the person who does not have a high IQ or a complex philosophy, but who succeeds through sheer invisibility. The industrial landscape of the Ruhr had provided him with a functional camouflage that the police were not trained to penetrate. The trial was relatively brief because the physical evidence was so overwhelming. Kroll was sentenced to life imprisonment, a functional end to a life that had caused so much silent destruction. He was moved to a high-security facility where he would spend the rest of his days as a subject of study for criminal psychologists. Inside the prison system, Kroll remained the same quiet and unremarkable figure he had been on the outside. He did not seek attention or participate in the social hierarchies of the inmate population. He performed his assigned tasks with the same robotic efficiency that he had applied to cleaning toilets in Duisburg. Psychologists who examined him were frustrated by his lack of depth. There was no grand revelation or hidden trauma that could explain the scale of his violence. He simply lacked the fundamental human hardware required for empathy or remorse. He was a functional biological machine that had evolved to hunt humans in an urban environment. His presence in the prison was a constant reminder of the failure of society to identify the predators living among them. He died in prison in 1991, following a heart attack. Even his death was a quiet and unremarkable event, matching the tone of the life he had led in apartment 10. The case was closed, but the psychological scars on the cities of the Ruhr remained, as people looked more closely at the quiet neighbors they once ignored. Today, the story of Joachim Kroll is a cornerstone of German criminal history. It serves as a warning about the dangers of social invisibility and the limitations of professional profiling. Kroll proved that a killer does not need to be a genius to be successful, they only need to be unremarkable. Subscribe, ring the bell, and thanks for watching. Don't forget. I will see you at the bottom of the well.